So why are we here and who are we? So I just introduced myself. The Judicial Council was one of the co-sponsors of the extended foster care legislation. And I've been working in this area for, well, extended foster care since it started, but like in terms of juvenile law for my entire career almost. And I'm going to now turn it over to the panel to introduce themselves. We have Lisa, Moulton Campbell, Athena Madison, and Cynthia Billey. So Cynthia, would you like to start?
Sure. Cynthia Billey. I'm the director of the adoption program at the Alliance for Children's Rights. And in addition to doing foster care adoptions of children under the age of 18, the Alliance feels so privileged to be working with probation department, Lisa Campbell Moulton. We also do adoptions for youth that are in the probation department, which is incredible. Lisa can reference that. And we also do adoptions for non-minor dependent youth, which is the one of our topics today. And so I'm going to let Athena introduce herself. She is a former client of the Alliance whose adoption we did.
My name is Athena Madison. I am here representing foster youth in this particular panel. I was adopted through the Alliance when I was a non-minor dependent, benefiting of AB12, in a particular situation where nobody had really gotten adopted through AB12, so it was a kind of in the dark process. I do a number of things for foster care. Just so you guys can have a little bit of my background, I worked in Pasadena for 3 years, just doing foster care work locally, and then I moved on to work in DC and address federal policy for foster youth, all tied to permanency, ironically. And then now I've kind of remained there, and I work for the Children's Bureau, although I'm not representing them today. I'm just representing myself. And so I just want to point out, I am one anomaly in the foster care system. I definitely do not represent, the disposition that a lot of foster youth go through. I'm not homeless at the moment, for example, and I was adopted, which is kind of rare, especially in my particular age group. So, kind of having that in mind, that what I say is just one perspective.
Hi, I'm Lisa Campbell Moulton, and I am the Director of Placement, Permanency, and Quality Assurance for the Probation Department under the Placement Services Bureau. And I've been in juvenile my whole career, 28 years of probation. It's all been juvenile because I love working with these kids. And so in my unit, one of our major functions is that we do all kinds of permanency for our kids, from family finding, which could also mean finding their parents because they've been separated and now their parents may have their lives back together. And so we actually have done that on a few cases as found biological parents who now come back into the child's life ready to be a permanent option for them. And then my unit, working with Alliance and a whole permanency collaboration committee that includes county council, DCFS, out-of-home care, recruitment and adoption, and the P3 unit. And so this collaboration has been together since 2000, so about 15 years, well actually I'm sorry, 2003. Around 2003 was when it started, and together this collaboration conducted the very first adoption and delinquency court, and we've set the trend for the nation. And according to some national experts in the state of California, we're the only ones doing delinquency adoptions. And so we're reaching out to other states to try to see, is anyone else doing this? Because we don't want to be false, but at this point we're pretty confident that California is doing the only state in the nation doing delinquency adoptions. And since our first, LA County has done 4 delinquency adoptions, and 3 other counties have done 3, and we're also working on our 8th adoption for the whole state of California. So it's really exciting times. And now the supervisor of the unit, who's right there, Kendra Hamilton. She's the supervisor of the unit. She's herself did an amazing thing. She did 2 adoptions in 1 year, which is absolutely incredible. And so she's sort of becoming our national expert on this subject. But we've now, since AB12, we are so excited because we had to stop doing at 18 prior to AB12 when a child turned 18, whether we were working on an adoption or not, it was over. And now we are so excited because the 8th adoption actually probably may turn 18, and he'll be the first one that we're able to do under this new legislation. So it's exciting times, and I'm so happy that we could be here and talk with you today.
So we're here obviously today to talk about the need for permanency. And permanency has been around since the federal government started giving us money for foster care youth. And so today we're hoping that we're going to give you some sort of understanding of the importance of permanency. We're going to try to talk a little bit about some substantive law areas for you. And then we're just hopefully going to give you some skills, and hopefully through Athena's discussions with you, to be able to learn how to talk or what to ask non-minor dependents or other youth to help them achieve permanency. So as we all know, extended foster care was put into place because we weren't really good at achieving permanency before 18. Our numbers, this was from a Chapin Hall article, 75% of emancipated youth were working below grade level. They didn't complete the high school, about 50% of them. 45% were unemployed, 33% arrested, 30% welfare, and 25% are homeless. These statistics don't capture the youth who had died out of the foster care system, and we don't have very good accurate numbers on that. So we hadn't done a really good job at permanency before 18, so now we're looking at achieving permanency after 18 with the non-minor dependents. So, permanency, looking at the basics of permanency, we have 3 measures in child welfare that we look at: safety, and probation, any foster youth, safety, permanency, and well-being. And so it's one of the big federal measures that we look at that everyone is always trying to improve on what they're doing. So I'm going to turn to the panel and ask them sort of what the legal requirements for permanency are, when do they start, and the emotional permanency. So Lisa, would you like to talk about some of the legal requirements for permanency for our youth in foster care, our options?
Yeah, and so Marymichael, made a really good point, is that, and a lot of people don't think of probation youth as foster children, but they are. So every child that's in an out-of-home care placement, whether it be with relatives, non-relatives, in a group home or in an FA, whether they're on probation or not, are under child welfare and are foster children. And so any time a foster child is removed from their home, permanency starts at day 1. So every social worker, every probation officer must begin a concurrent plan. If they're trying to send that child home to their family, they still must have a backup and start working on that at the same time. So I know most of you know this, but the law used to be that it was what's that word? Sequential, or one after another. So you would work on trying to get them home to their parents, and then if that failed 12 months later, then you started working on a concurrent plan. But when the law changed, you have to work on both of them at the same time. So.
And just on legal requirements for permanency, the piece that I bring to the panel, the thing that's new, that was a cleanup bill to AB12 is AB1712, which is that if you are between the ages of 18 and 20 and decide to continue into extended foster care and meet the requirements for extended foster care, that permanency planning does not stop. So it's not just it's important. For the youth between 18 and 21, the social workers and probation officers are working towards independence for the child and teaching them independent living skills. But they also have an obligation and responsibility to help find a permanent connection for that non-minor dependent. And we're going to talk more about that for a few minutes, a little bit later, I think. But what the key point of that enactment, I think Marymichael already said it, was that the youth between 18 and 20 do want permanency, and they're themselves identifying their own permanent connections and wanting, and Athena will talk about this, wanting to step forward to their attorney or to their social worker and to the court, I do want to be adopted, and now there's a process to try to achieve that. That's part of the legal requirements.
Yeah, and so Athena, would you mind talking to us about why it was important for you to have legal and emotional permanency?
It's interesting as I didn't know, permanency is such an ambiguous kind of word. It's you talk to a foster kid about it and they're like, what? And it's just so loosely defined. For different foster youth, it can mean very different things. For some, it can just mean very stable relationships. For me, it meant adoption. For me, it meant relief. And it came around the time when I was 18, and this is just before AB12 was coming into its kind of, and so I remember being in a situation going, oh my God, like I'm gonna be homeless, I'm turning 18 soon, and freaking out, and just making the cut for AB12 and going, oh thank God. And so permanency was so nowhere in my brain. It was more of a survival mindset of, oh my God, I need to save money, I need to find a place to live, and I was going to do the Youth Moving On program that was in Pasadena because I thought I'll be too old for any place to accept me. So permanency isn't something that was really a priority for me. It was more just like the immediate survival, shelter, food, kind of some relief. And I was lucky enough to get placed in a home that wanted to enable an older youth. And so that's when I was able to actually kind of put pause to the survival mindset and kind of go, oh my God, I have the time to heal. I have the time to think, what do I actually need and what do I actually want? And that's when the idea of adoption came in, and I thought, well, nobody's even talked to me about this. I didn't even know this was an option for me. Nobody said, hey, you're 18, almost 19, and you can still be adopted. It was kind of like a pipe dream, kind of just something you don't talk about. And so when this conversation did come up, it was just this automatic, like, I gotta do that. I gotta get adopted. If I can, I will. And it was just, most foster youth, I think there's like an innate kind of desperation for a parent. I mean, I think that's just anybody's circumstance, anybody that isn't even in foster care, you just want somebody to lean and fall back on. And so when you get into your older years, you do that with a spouse, right? But when you're younger, you do that with a parent. And foster youth don't have that. And so because we don't have that, we don't really think about what we need. So we find out with all these mistakes and not knowing, and so we speak up way too late. I was able to be in a situation where I went, oh my God, I have the option of adoption. This is an actual possibility for me. And I thought, why in the world would I choose to go emancipate at 21 when I can be adopted and go to school and have that extra break? And so for me, permanency meant relief. It meant adoption. It meant long-term kind of stability. It meant having more time to actually grow, make my mistakes, and go to school. And so yeah, that was very important for me because I know who I want to be in the future, and I know the kind of tools that I need for that. I just didn't have anybody to really enable that. And so that's why it became a very kind of big key role in my life.
So the forms that permanency can take, we've talked about, they've mentioned this, reunification with family, so biological permanency, reunification with family, you all know this, it's the most preferred permanent plan. If we can get these kids back home to a safe, healthy environment with safe, healthy parents, that is what we want. That's what the federal legislation says we want. That, as a state, is what we want. Our second option, if that can't happen, is adoption. And now, as you've heard, we have non-minor dependent adoptions, which are now, we can do 18 to 21, and Cynthia will go into the requirements of that. We have guardianships, but that connection has to be made before 18 because guardianships by operation of law end at 18. So if your youth wants to be in a guardianship, it's important to do that before they turn 18, unless that option goes away. However, the funding for that option doesn't go away. So if you're in a guardianship after the age of 16, those benefits go up until 21. So it's very important to talk to the youth about that. And then emotional permanency regarding lifelong supportive connections. We know that not all of our youth will be able to reunify. Not all of our youth will be adopted. Not all of our youth will be able to go into guardianships. But all of our youth should be leaving the system, whether it be at 18 or 21 or before that, with a lifelong connection. Somewhere where they can go for Thanksgiving. someone that they can call at 3 a.m. when their car breaks down in the middle of the road, right? Those people that they can reach out to so that they can be a supportive, and they can have that support and have a healthy environment. So I'm going to turn it over to Lisa, since she brought this up, a little bit about concurrent planning. What it is, when does it start, what do we have to do, all of those things.
Yeah, so I already shared with you about concurrent planning having to start at day one. And so, as Marymichael just said, adoption is the #1 concurrent plan that should happen. And so we've had to, do a really, for child welfare, those social workers, that's sort of just kind of a common thing for them. For probation child welfare, we really had to help our placement officers understand this concept of how do I, if I'm trying to get this kid to go home with their parents, why am I also trying to find someone else? And because a lot of times our kids do not go home to our parents, or should I say, a lot of times our kids do go home to their parents. But in our experience, in general, we have about 700 kids in group home care. And that doesn't account for about 70 or so that are in non-relative care. But those 700, we typically have about 100 and something kids in permanency that are not going to go home to their parents. And so those are the ones that it's really critical. But even though children are planning on going home to parents and they have parents available, we still have to work on a concurrent plan. So the way that we've trained our officers is that they basically just ask that parent, if something were to happen to you, where would you want your child to go, and involve the biological family in creating that concurrent plan. So it's not offensive to them, like, why are you trying to find someone else for my kid to go? But it's like, if something were to happen to you, what? So that's how we've been able to really enhance our concurrent planning efforts and ensure that every kid does have a concurrent plan. And again, the adoption piece of it is really critical. We do try to find adoptive families for all of our kids. And one of the great things that has happened for probation is that DCFS has extended their media recruitment piece to us. And so over the last 10 years, we probably had 3 or 4 children, probation foster children, participate in media recruitment, where we were able to get their videos on TV, and they went to Kid Save events and things that just normal DCFS kids would go to, has now been extended to probation. So that has helped with increasing our concurrent planning for those kids.
So concurrent planning isn't something you're going to find in the Welfare and Institutions Code section. If you open up a legal book, you're not going to find the term concurrent planning. It's something that's come through case law, through federal mandates, that we have to do this. Concurrent planning starts, like Lisa said, at day one, but it doesn't end. It doesn't end until we find a permanent connection for these youth. And so I want to ask Athena if anyone had talked to you about concurrent planning, if anyone had talked to you about permanency prior to you seeking it out on your own.
No, that was actually never a conversation. So I thought it was pretty interesting when we talked about this on the phone a few days ago, that it was kind of this assumption that had happened. I never had a conversation with anybody about permanency. It was almost kind of just a fact, or this, I want to say reified, but it was a fact that you're going to age out and go through this process and go through transition housing and go on with your life. And based on who you were as a foster youth, you would more so likely succeed. And so they'd look at me and go, oh, you've got your stuff together. There's far worse foster youth that need our attention. You've got this. And so, it's kind of just like assembly line, and that's kind of the caseworkers in an assembly line moving kids forward and forward and forward. And so nobody really took the time to talk to me about permanency. And the only way I found out was when I was talking to my now adoptive mom about my experience in care. And she said that when I was placed with her, they told her that I had said I didn't want to be adopted. But nobody had ever spoken to me about this, and it was just an assumption the caseworkers had made because I guess I was, I don't know, very vocal or resistant, I have no idea. And so there's no real basis for them to say that, but it just kind of stayed in my profile, and wherever I went, people thought this. And I thought, what? Like, this is, are you kidding me? I could have gotten adopted a long time ago. So it was really, really frustrating. But in that conversation, it was this like sudden like, wow, so you do want to be adopted? I was like, yes, I do want to be adopted. Is this even a conversation? Like, can this happen? And so I was very lucky, I guess, to even have that conversation come across my path, because I could have never been adopted and never had that option. So yeah, that was never a conversation. There was no like permanency plan or anything like that.
So I think it's just important that, you know, we just continue to ask, right? As people, as the speaker this morning was saying about the team, that the team keep asking. And because we know that our youth, their minds change as well. So maybe one day they say no, and the next day they say yes, but we just have to remember to keep asking the question to make sure that we're going to give them the best, most permanent option possible for them. We know that concurrent planning starts really early on. The other issue that really starts early on is family finding. Family finding is a state and federal mandate, and it's supposed to be, I think we all know this now, right? The federal law changed. It said you have to notify family members within the first 30 days of a child coming into foster care. And so we were hoping that all these relatives would come forward, and you know, some have and some haven't. But there is, you know, it takes a lot of work and a lot of time to do that. And so I wanted to, I know Lisa does a lot of work on this in Los Angeles County for probation, and I know child welfare has to do it as well, but I was wondering if you could speak to that, Lisa.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that just as lessons learned for us was that, you know, we were so excited to find a kid family, and so we search and we search and we search, and we finally find somebody, and we bring them together, and we think, oh, you know, the pot at the end of the rainbow, when really it brings up so much pain for that child. And that's something that we have, you know, again, lessons learned, and Kendra's shaking her head because we've traumatized some kids by, you know, finding their families, finding their biological mom and their dad, which is what we have to do, but it can be very traumatizing. And even though it's a good thing and a positive thing, it still hurts, because it's like, well, where have you been all this time? And so we've learned that we really have to prepare those kids well in advance, talking to them about what emotions will come up, so they won't be surprised, because I think they're even surprised by how horrible I feel now. I have all these people loving me, and you guys have all seen Antoine Fisher and the big meal where all the people are gathered. He walks into the room and everyone's there, and there's this big meal, and so it looks all beautiful, but there's a lot of pain there. It's like, not one of you, there's 20 of you here, nobody searched for me, none of you looked for me. And so that's something that we really want to focus on. We also use some you know, search engines, but this, you know, the search engines, we've all found it's way better just digging in the file. And you know, the archaic way, these search engines really aren't as successful or helpful as we thought they would be. They can give us some keys, but the best way is just finding people and just talking and calling and digging and digging and digging. And we've had a lot of success with finding families. So, and the main thing Marymichael said is that we never stop. You never stop asking a kid, regardless of what their age is, because everybody wants to be wanted and belong to a family. And even if it only results in emotional permanency and not legal, that everyone has somebody for the rest of their life is the main thing for family finding.
To give you a little legal perspective on family finding, it was instituted through the Fostering Connections Act in 2008, which is also the act that implemented extended foster care for us up until the age of 21. So it was part of the same package. You know, and the federal law just said that we're required to notify people within relatives within 30 days of a child coming into care. Relative wasn't defined in the federal statute. California has defined it as the 5th degree of relative, which means it's a great-great, and it's a spouse of a great-great, or a widow of a great-great. So that's a lot of people that have to be noticed. The court is required to make a finding about due diligence, whether the department has done due diligence to notify these people. And I think that we just have to keep in mind that I know things are so tough. There's so many cases. There's so much work to be done. And so trying to get outside help to try to do this is often, you know, needed. I know other counties use CASAs to do some of this work, or other nonprofits who can help do this work, because it's important work, but it's also very hard, tedious, and time-consuming work. and we know that the agencies are maxed as it is. One of the reasons I also wanted to sort of flag family finding issues, we have this new federal law that was just passed by the Obama administration in 2014. It's called Improving Sex Trafficking and, no, it's Preventing Sex Trafficking and Strengthening Families Act. Sorry. I was like, that doesn't sound right. And that law has specifically said that the option of planned permanent living arrangement is no longer available for kids under the age of 16. I don't know what that's going to look like in California. We haven't looked at legislation for that yet. There are some pending bills. But there's a component in the federal law that says even if the youth is 16 and in a planned permanent living arrangement, the court has to make judicial determinations about the ongoing unsuccessful efforts that the agency has made to find family or to return the child home, and is required under federal law to use technology to search for these family members, including adult siblings. So this is now, the federal government has now made a mandate in Title 40 in the foster care statutes that says that, you know, family finding, we really need to do it. I think in 2008 they said we need to do it, we need to do it at the front end, and now they're saying, okay, really, if these kids don't have anyone, we really need to do it, and you need to show what you're doing to try to find them. So I think that is going to be a little bit of a shift, because I think a lot of the agencies are really good at doing it at the front end and asking people at the front end and trying to do it at the front end, and I think as the case goes on, we sort of do forget about asking, and so I think this law will just make it that it's on everybody's mind to try to find family members for these youth to go to. The implications of family finding, Lisa had talked about these, the emotional regressions, barriers. So my question then is, Lisa, why, if this could be the outcome, why would you still want to do it? If it's, and I don't know the answer to that question, but I want to ask.
Yeah, and I think Athena could also say that too, because even though it's scary and it brings up pain, they still want to be wanted, and you know, and I think that's another, like she was saying, there's just an assumption that older youth, you know, don't want that. They want to be on their own. They're just wanting to be free. But the truth is that even as painful as that might be, that, you know, you're my Uncle Tom, and why didn't you ever look for me? I still want you, Uncle Tom. You know, thank you for being here. So everybody wants to be wanted, even though it's scary and painful. And so I think that the other piece of it too is that rejection issue. We also try to really minimize that. So we vet people very, very carefully. Once we found somebody, we don't just automatically introduce the kid. We make sure that this is a person who's going to be safe for them. We make sure that this is a person who's invested, and sort of do a little bit of whatever that's called, front running, you know, before we bring the kid into the situation. But I would like to hear from you. Even if you had all these people that come, would it be something that you would not want us to do because it's painful, or what would be the motivation to continue forward?
It's interesting, is when I entered the system at 14, they did try to track down some of my other family members. I don't have many family members, so I thought, okay, well, I know who you're going to find if you find anyone. And I wasn't too eager to meet up with them. They weren't bad people, they just weren't there for me before. So I thought, well, now that I got myself into the system and I had to like claw my way out of that life, why do I need you? And so they did bring my brother, who he was born with cerebral palsy, and that's how my biological mother passed away, and I hadn't seen him since then. And so they were able to track him down, and I was kind of shocked because, I mean, he's completely paralyzed. He's like made of stone or something. Like he can't move, smile, blink, anything. And so it was just kind of definitely like this emotional like shock, and it happened very close to the time I had just entered the system. So I was already going through a lot of emotional kind of like angst, where I had a lot of anxiety and I couldn't hold a conversation. I just started crying and crippled down, and I didn't know this at the time, but I was really severely suffering from PTSD. And so then here comes my brother, and I'm like, oh my God, like it definitely like pulled out, because it re-triggered my mom's death. And so I definitely agree. It was definitely an emotional experience for me. Just thinking about it is just like, wow. But, so sorry for getting emotional.
It's okay.
So I see the value, but it is definitely very difficult, and so being in the foster kid perspective of a survivor, it was incredibly hard. And I can't expect a kid who doesn't have the skills that I do to actually be able to deal with that and to go, oh yeah, I've got this handled, I know what I want. It's very unrealistic, and it's very damaging. I think that most foster youth don't get the attention, the mental health attention that they need, and then you kind of keep throwing them into courtrooms, and they have to come face to face with their parents every single 6 months, the hearing, and then they bring all these family members in, and there's just no kind of rest. And so I think it's just like back to back to back to back trauma. So yeah, it was definitely, I see the value, and I see from how this can be beneficial to other foster youth who don't have anybody there for them. But for me, it was more like, no, thank you, I'm okay. And so I kind of was just happy going, okay, Christian is fine. He's not gonna ever learn to speak, so it's not like I had to really care for his well-being per se. I knew he was alive, and the people he was with weren't doing him any harm. And you know what, there's part of me that goes, wow, should I be taking care of this kid? Like when I turn 18, am I gonna have to take on this responsibility? Because he was the last son my mom had, and blah, blah, blah. So it just brought up a lot, and it wasn't healthy for me. So I see the value, but I personally said no. I definitely said no. I was like, no, thank you. So yeah, sorry.
Good, no, thank you. Thank you.
So I think that just illustrates the balance, right? That you have to strike when working with youth and introducing them to people they may not know. I mean, if you think about fifth degree a relative, and it could be a great aunt or second cousin or whatever that they don't have a relationship with, although meeting the relative, maybe, I think that would be a hard transition, and we have to really plan for that to do that. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about emotional permanency and lifelong connections. So again, we know that youth are not always going to be adopted or put in guardianships or go home, but we still need them to have these lifelong connections, this emotional permanency, this person that they can call. And I remember presenting with a foster youth once it was her bus driver from school. That was her lifelong connection. That was the person, she came into the foster care system, and they were asking important individuals, and she said it was her bus driver. And her bus driver actually became her foster parent and then her adoptive parent. And so for these, the legal requirement for a child out of home for 6 months or more, the review hearing must contain, and that is, it must contain information on important individuals. There has to be something in the report. The court has to make a finding that the agency has asked the child who the important individuals are in their life. And that's 16501.1. For non-minor dependents, the finding the court has to make is that the agency has maintained and obtained lifelong connections for this youth. So the agency's responsibility is not only to help the youth maintain these connections, it's also to try to help them obtain connections for lifelong connections. And I was giving sort of a discussion like this to a room full of judges, with other judges on the panel, thank goodness. And so we were sort of talking about this issue, and the judges are like, well, what am I supposed to do? order that they like have play dates with each other, or like, you know, go and you know, try to socialize. And the judges are like, yeah, you have to know what efforts the agencies make to help them try to get these lifelong connections. And I think Athena speaks very clearly, you know, very eloquently about this, but not all kids are ready or know how to make connections. Not all kids know how to make good connections or relationships, or know how to sustain those relationships. So part of this, especially for our non-minor dependents, is teaching them, right? What is it to be in a healthy connection? What is it to be in a healthy friendship? What does that look like? And how can we support that? And I was just going to turn it over to you, Lisa, to see if you had any comments about that.
Not really right now. I'm still a little overwhelmed by her. Beautiful person.
I'll add one thing.
Sure.
In terms of lifelong connections, on the non-minor dependent side, the first non-minor dependent adoption that we ever did was Michelle, and she was about to turn 21-year-old developmentally disabled young woman, and she was adopted by her teacher, who was her teacher at her special day school. Dana was her teacher for 3 or 4 years as Michelle approached 18 and then 19. And so in Michelle's case, it was actually her lifelong connection that came forward to the county and to the court and said, I want to be Michelle's permanent connection. I want to adopt her. And so in terms of lifelong connections, there are, it's not only possibly the youth coming forward and identifying a coach or something like that. It's often teachers that you've been involved with that step forward to the county and even suggested to the child. In this case, Michelle couldn't communicate her desires, but so just thought I'd add that about the variety of lifelong connections and how that can happen.
Okay, so getting to permanency, how do we actually get to where we want to go, which is achieve permanency for our young people? And I was just hoping that the panel would sort of go through what they believe their role is in reaching permanency for these youth. So Lisa, do you want to? Are you okay now?
I'm okay now.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for giving that.
She's never okay.
Yeah.
Everything makes her.
I know. Like her at McDonald's commercials. The old ones, the new ones. But our keynote speaker this morning just said it so well about the team. And so I think it's the main role of the social worker and the probation officer is to build a team, because there's just no way that one person can do all the things that's necessary for the course of that child stay with us to do what needs to be done in such a quick, immediate way, but then slow, you know, because we're so urgent about stuff, and then we got to slow down because we need to prepare and we need to not rush into any placements and things like that. So it takes a whole team, and that's something that we have really learned with our permanency collaboration committee. That has become a team. We talk about every single case there, and we get everyone's feedback and opinion. We've started to do MDTs, or team decision, when we come to a point where a kid is getting ready to go to a foster family. You know, we all come around the table. What do we need to do for that? So I think the main role is to build that team and to stay consistent and never ever, you know, our keynote speaker was just so right on that we don't give up. And when the beauty of a team, and one of my colleagues had said this one time, when one person gets tired, like she so eloquently said, the other people can take back up. And then when those people get tired, the person that was tired, like, okay, I'm ready to go again, because it is so emotionally taxing and draining that team is really important.
Cynthia, do you have anything to add about the?
Yeah, the role, I'm the advocate, we're the attorneys that finalize the adoption, but it's what Lisa said, it's a team effort. So, I mean, half of my role, I mean, our main role is legally we represent the adoptive parents when we finalize adoptions, but we collaborate closely with LA County DCFS and with probation, and work extremely closely with them to try, if adoption is the plan, to make it happen, and to represent the interests of the adoptive parents and the youth to get that adoption to happen.
And so just from the court's perspective, you know, the court has an oversight role, not only to make sure that all the legal mandates are being looked at, but also to sort of take in the whole picture and try to gather all the information possible to make the best decision for the youth. So the role of the court, I mean, I think each judicial officer might have a different thought about this, and each judicial officer runs their courtroom a different way. But it's asking the questions and just keeping on top of it, because I think there's a lot of, the courts know how busy everybody is, and they know how taxing the caseloads are and the workloads are for each person. But their ultimate goal is to try to achieve permanency for this child, and so they just have to keep their eye on the ball, and their role is to make sure, I mean, unfortunately it is sort of to hold the feet to the fire of the agency, right, to make sure all of this work is being done. But I think it's a balancing act because the courts know the caseloads, so it's this balancing act that they have to do in terms of pushing towards permanency, because the youth can't wait forever, right? If you think about a 5-year-old, a year is a really long time for them. Whereas like, I'm like, wow, it's 2015 already? Like, how did we get here? You know, it seems so quick for us as adults, but if we look at it from the child's perspective, it's a little bit, it's a long time to achieve some permanency for them. And so I'm going to turn it over to Athena and ask her what the role of the youth is to getting to their permanency. What was your role in getting to your own permanency?
You know, I think it's very easy for me to kind of expect or want youth to be very proactive in their lives and kind of definitely be an agent and spearhead their choices. But I think it's not very possible, not very realistic when youth are so conflicted with the trauma and they're being shuffled around. And I think you know, when the role of social worker is being discussed, for a youth, I think the social worker is kind of like their parent, because throughout all the homes they're moved to, that's the one consistent figure. And there's such a disconnect there because, you know, every time you see your social worker, it's like, I was saying on the phone, it's like scribble, note, and then it's like, oh, so how are you doing? Okay, great. Oh, okay, great. And you don't really have a conversation, and then it's really one-sided. And so I grew up really learning from people's experiences and not just hearing from them, but seeing them and stuff. And so I really needed to know who my social worker was as a person for me to even go, okay, you know, because it gives me more of a figure, not just like a paper person that pushes my files and, you know, visits me once a month and rarely knows me. And so I would say the goal of the youth, I know this is going to sound odd, but it's to just kind of be, because the youth that come into care are so kind of caught in the waves of just their trauma and their family and what they want versus what they can have, and being moved and having to readjust every 6 months because you get moved to a new home, that there's no real way to go, okay, let's put all of this on pause and let me tell you what I need or what I want, or, you know, and so they don't even take the time to grow or to have a childhood or to heal. And so there's no way for them to actively engage in their own lives and be proactive about the things that they want. So I would say the role of the youth is to be, and then to speak up, you know, when you need something, because we don't, but we need to. So yeah.
And I would just add on to be and to speak. So I mean, I don't want to get Lisa started if we talk about Stephen too much. But we worked with a probation adoption. This youth's name was Stephen. I think Lisa knows his whole story, but he wanted to be adopted. He really did, and he made that clear. And therefore, people worked hard to try to make that happen for him, including the single mom that ended up adopting him. I remember her telling me at the adoption hearing that she was his foster, or he was in a group home. I think she worked at the group home or something. I can't, Lisa will know. But she heard him say how much he wanted a family, and she thought to herself, that is one kid that really does not belong in a group home. I'm going to adopt him. It was a really great story, but it was due to Stephen's. He knew what he wanted, and it is difficult, considering what, as Athena was mentioning. But, you know, I do think, and youth have appointed counsel. They do have someone that they can go tell and that they want to be adopted. And one of the things that comes up in my presentation, and we have to keep an eye on the clock because we have to allow time for Q&A, is that the non-minor dependent adoption process itself can be triggered by the youth. The statute provides that if you have a permanent connection and you want to be adopted, you can, at the 6-month review hearing, you can come to the court and say, I want to be adopted, here's my permanent connection. You can do that through your minor's attorney or through telling your social worker. So the youth role is very important, especially for the non-minor dependents after the age of 18.
Okay, so speaking of that, do you want to get into the non-minor dependent adoption? Let's do that.
Sure.
Yes. Yeah, I think we should. We have some other things that we can come back to if we have time.
I'll go quickly.
But I want to make sure that
it's really easy and real straightforward.
we get there.
You can skip to the next slide.
Okay.
Basically, I mentioned it already, as a trailer bill, or cleanup, whatever it's called, to AB12, they passed AB1712 in 2013. And it makes it possible for youth that are in extended foster care between the ages of 18 and 20, they can actually be adopted in the juvenile court and keep their benefits. One of the myths, by the way, that older youth have, including all the way back to age 16, is that if you get adopted, you're going to lose all your benefits. You're going to lose your funding, you're going to lose the Medi-Cal. In the context of adoption, what they've made possible with this new law is that the youth can get adopted and they'll get adoption assistance payments. So the funding actually is paid to the adoptive parent, but it's for the youth, and I'm sure they figure out how they're managing the money together. But the key point is that you can have both. You can have the financial support and an adoptive parent. So it's really important. The second little bullet there, what exactly is non-minor dependent adoption? It's like traditional adult adoption under the family code, in that it's an adult, an 18-year-old or 19-year-old, who is coming to the same agreement with the adult that's adopting them. So adult adoption is literally the signing of an agreement of adoption between two consenting adults. So all that's needed for that adoption is signing the adoption consent. You don't have to have termination of parental rights. That's only for 18 and under. So, once you have that mutual consent, it's like another adoption. It creates a parental relationship between those two adults, the parent and child, including changing inheritance rights and things like that. You can skip to the next one. I'm going to go real quickly so we have time for Q&A. We talked about this, but the key about AB 1712 was they wanted to reinforce to the county workers and to the probation officers, you've got to do both. You've got to try to prepare these youth in extended foster care for independence, but also, especially if they desire it, help them achieve permanency. So there's requirements now for social workers and probation officers to do case planning that includes help them identify a permanent connection, all the things, family finding, and then documenting that they want that in your court reports. So when you go to that 6-month review hearing, maybe you can start this process. You can skip to the next slide. So on this slide, I just threw in key facts about how this law works. Basically, the way it works is that at the 6-month review hearings, that I think if we had had more time, Marymichael would have gone into all these review hearings. But there is a review hearing where the non-minor dependent can come forward, it's the second bullet, and request that they want to be adopted. There are some requirements under this law. It's that phrase, established relationship. The law intends that the youth is being adopted by, not someone they found on the internet 2 weeks ago. There is an assessment. Part of the law is, it's not like a full-blown adoption home study that the county is responsible for doing when you're adopting a minor, but there is an assessment. There's some teeth to it, and that assessment is done by the social worker or the probation officer, and is put into a court report that gets filed with the juvenile court. But the assessment, there's a few bullets in there. It's supposed to be youth-focused. It evaluates the length and nature of that relationship, and what is that person's motivation for adopting. It's important. It's not supposed to be a random type of thing. There is a component of a basic criminal background clearance, the Adam Walsh, and that's because, adoption assistance funding is involved. The federal government does require that there's got to be a basic check on this family. Face-to-face interviews, and of course the consent. This is all about the consent, that the two parties want this. There's a couple other pieces. One of the interesting things is there's still a requirement that when a non-minor dependent like Athena Marie is adopted, the county is responsible for putting together this disclosure of all of their medical, psychosocial, and historical background information. So in a traditional adoption, when you're under 18, I'm sure some of you know, there's the adoptive placement where the county discloses to that adoptive parent all the child's background. In this context, it's actually the youth's choice. They control their own information, and once that disclosure is made to Athena of all her background information, they can only disclose what they have, so there's a lot of frustration there. A lot of youth feel that it's not a lot of information, but then it's actually Athena's choice if she wants to share that information with her new adoptive parent. There, the technicalities of it, all that's thrown in a court report. You can skip to the next slide. And the way it works, I think I skipped over that, but it's meant to move quickly. So once you have that review hearing where the youth steps, or the minor's attorney or the social worker reports to the court, we have a non-minor dependent and a permanent connection, we want to do an adoption. The statute says the court actually has to set a hearing within 60 days to try to finalize that adoption. Now, there is some work that has to be done to get to that point, but it's supposed to happen within 60 days. And aside from the assessment, there's not a lot of extraneous requirements. The attorney, or doesn't even have to be an attorney, but I put together the agreement of adoption and the order, and get together with the county, and we get everything filed, and you can do the hearing within 60 days. Judicial Council developed the basic forms we need. LA County has a new petition we file. And that's kind of how the process works in a nutshell. And we've done, very proud to say this, all across the state of California, they're trying to implement non-minor dependent adoption. There's a great statewide committee that worked on this, but I still think LA County may be the only one that's actually done them. And we've completed 7. I'm working on 3 right now with LIDCFS. Get calls from minor attorneys all the time. How do I do this? If anybody in the audience doesn't know how to do this, please feel free to call me at the Alliance. Our phone number is on here, and we can steer you in the right direction.
And I have to say that Nevada County did the first delinquency adult adoption.
Oh.
I'll send you the story.
Okay.
So they're easier to do. A lot of the child welfare agencies across the state have been doing them for the kids who have been waiting pending home study and turning 18.
Right.
So because the home studies have been taking so long, the adult adoption is a lot easier to do. And a lot of youth are now asking for adult adoption because there's not a termination of parental rights. So before they're 18, there's a termination of parental rights, and they don't really want to do that. They don't want to sever that relationship. But since they're after 18, there's not a termination. A lot of youth are more open to that idea. So, just next steps, I just want us to think about what each of us can do to achieve permanency and how we can help the youth advocate for their own permanency. I think Athena talked about that today, and I want to be wary of the time, so I'm going to leave the last portion of our time for questions and answers. So if there's any questions, let us know.
How difficult is it to get out of the AB12 relationship if it turns out that it's not working for both parties?
How difficult is it to get out of it?
Out of
You mean
to terminate an adoption.
If you've actually done the adoption after 18? Boy, you got me. I mean, I suppose the parties could go back to Superior Court and try to set aside their adoption. I've never, in an under 18 adoption, if one of the adoptive parents wants to get out of the adoption, the code provides the circumstances under which you can go in and set aside an adoption. But I haven't really thought about this if they're over the age of 18. I don't think you really can. You've got a legal order that you adopted that person. You'd have to go back to court and file a petition to set it aside.
And Cynthia, even under 18, isn't it very hard? It's like very rare circumstance that the court would set aside.
Yes, there's statute of limitations. There's specific provisions for under 18-year-olds that if, for example, the county didn't meet its obligation to disclose full information about the child's, disabilities or mental health issues, there's a grounds where you can go in and try to set it aside. There's nothing like that, though, in the context of the statute setting up non-minor dependent adoption. But, I'd have to talk about it with my managing attorney. It is on the one sense, it's a consensual, contractual agreement that they signed. I suppose you could go in and try to rescind your own agreement, to be honest. There are a lot of the non-minor dependent adoptions I've already done so far have been the situation where, for whatever reason, they just couldn't get the adoption done before the child turned 18. And they still have that opportunity now. It's not like people that just met and haven't sort of built a surety that they want to do this.
I have a question. I'm one of your providers in the audience, and we work with 18 to 24-year-olds. Most of the young people who are coming, this is for anyone on the panel, most of our young people who are coming into a program with us, when we're asking them about permanent connections that they have, their circles of support, most of the people they identify are institutional folks, right? So people who are doing the work, or they're not identifying anybody. My question is, and as a provider, we don't have the resources to do the permanency work. We're always looking for how we can grow their circles of support, but what kind of resources are available to providers to help our young folks in program make those permanency connections?
Lisa, I was going to say Cynthia.
No.
Let me put it to you this way. I don't know that at DCFS, I know that, I know in a lot of kids' cases, it seems like they never asked me, but there are many more other examples where social workers have gone out of their way. They have the PP3 program at DCFS. They have all these new recruitment tools. I mean, I think even within DCFS, there are resources. I'm not sure which provider you are. Are you like a
First place rated. We're a transitional housing provider.
Yeah, someone within the agency would be better to answer that question. I think Cynthia kind of hit on something, is that the social worker of the kid and the probation officer of the kid are going to be
they have an obligation.
They're going to be a big resource for you because they have to find the resources. And for probation, our big resource is DCFS, and we have that collaboration. So we always encourage any provider that's working with a kid to bring that case, and that's why we try to have those team meetings where the provider should be invited, and you can always request a team meeting too, because when you get a bunch of people in a room,
right,
there's people can brainstorm and come up with things.
Well, and one thing I do know is monthly I attend this adoption consortium meeting, which is all the FFAs around the county plus DCFS and advocates, and they sit around there and they talk about everything they're doing to try to find adoptive homes for kids. And they network. There's information about when they're having an event for youth. So they have events for older youth. They have events for younger youth. They have events, activities where the kids go. That the social workers for the foster parents invite them to the event to actually meet. I mean, there are the old-fashioned ways that you're trying to connect, and that these would apply even to the over 18 youth. Although I think that's what's so new that everyone's trying to figure out.
Right.
How does this work with considering group homes? Like, I have a lot of people that's in group homes, and the idea of adoption just never comes up. Like you were saying, there's social workers, you go to TDM, no one, I just had a TDM the other day actually, where they talked about what was going to happen for this youth. And it seems like it's what Athena was saying, that it's like, you're going to turn 18 and then you're going to go to transitional housing and then you're going to age out. I've never heard anything about adoption, ever, for any youth that was older. Like ones that are under 5, when I worked in mental health, we might have had that conversation. So who is supposed to be talking about this?
The social worker.
Yeah, it's just the agency. So there's, for non-minor dependents, specifically, there's a finding, and there's supposed to be information in the court report about, at every hearing, about whether there's a prospective adoptive parent. or who the lifelong connection is, or what the plan is, and what the backup plan is. There's supposed to be 2 plans. What the plan is now and what the backup plan is going to be. And so, so yeah, I mean, it's a legal requirement. It's in our statutes that it's for non-minor dependents. They're supposed to be asking that at every 6 months. Every 6 months there should be information in the report about prospective adoptive parents.
But I'm glad that you said that about group homes, because all group homes, that it's part of the group, the provider, she's clearly a provider and knows this. Every group home should know that that's something that they're working in conjunction with the social worker and the probation officer. And also, and I will let DCFS know, they hold monthly forums with all their group homes and all their FFAs, and we hold quarterly forums with all of our providers. And we tell them at every meeting, Kendra, who's the supervisor over the probation permanency unit, presents every, so there's no provider that cannot say that adoption is not important. So I'm happy to hear you say that, because I'm going to go back and make sure that we really push that the providers are to be assisting with that as well.
And I was just going to say, it really is important to go back and talk to the social workers, because if for some reason it's fallen off people's radar, it really just needs to be brought back up. Has anybody considered this? Has anybody brought it up? Are they looking for that connection? It maybe they got on a track a long time ago that really has to be readdressed. And it should, long before you get to the point of non-minor dependent, it should always be on that track as a concurrent planning. It should just never, and with this new change in federal law when it comes to California and all the redesign that's happening with our foster care system in California, it's going to become more and more important that we just really not lose sight. And it's all important about us really wanting to make sure that kids have permanency earlier, so we don't have kids languishing in foster care and languishing in group homes, so that we don't, have to rely on our providers long term to provide the resources that they didn't get before.
So you mentioned there's no CPR involved with an adult adoption. Are there any consequences or implications that could complicate things later in life for that adopted person with having an adult adoption and also still have the birth parents' rights never having been terminated?
I mean, well, but legally, in effect, the birth parents' rights, they're not terminated, but the effect of an adult adoption, and actually the language is in the adoption order, is that the rights and responsibilities of the birth parents are severed, are ended, because they're replaced with the legal rights and responsibilities of adoptive parents. So there is an impact on the youth's inheritance rights. I mean, this is kind of a dumb joke, but if you're a non-minor dependent and your father is Bill Gates, you might not necessarily, I don't mean to make light of it, but if it's to wait, you are sort of giving, you are possibly, now people can provide however they want. Even if you do an adult adoption, your birth family might find you someday and put you in their will. They still see you as your kid, but legally, it can affect inheritance rights. Now, I can't really think of anything else detrimental that could happen with that.
It'd be no different than any other adoption in that sense. It's acquiring the same rights and responsibilities of any other adoption. You're just doing it later, and the process is arguably easier.
Right.
Right.
But it does get tricky with inheritance. One of the non-minor dependent adoptions I did, the youth, they did have a concern, because the family in Mexico, I think it was, had. Maybe I don't want to talk about that then.
Oh, that was my.
There were some things we discussed because Anyway, there was some considerations about would that impact the land, and
so that was a big concern. My biological family owns a lot of property in Mexico, and when my mom passed away in Mexico, it goes to me and my siblings and my dad. But here in the U.S., it's backwards. If you're not the legal parent, then there is no accountability for that child, which means that if you want your kid to inherit those things, you have to actively put them in your will. So it became more of a discussion between comparing the law between countries. So that's kind of what my issue reduced down to, which I was like, I don't care about the property. I'm never going to go to Mexico.
I forgot that was your issue. Sorry.
It's okay.
So we've reached our 12:15 time. We're available to ask answer any questions. Athena does have a final to get to, so.
We really want to thank Athena for coming today.